Hello, it's David Britton again from the Emotional Wellbeing and Mental Health team in Southend. This is the second of 3 webinars. In the first webinar, we spoke about anxiety and about the physical elements of anxiety and how best to manage them. Today we're going to discuss the thoughts that are involved with anxiety. I'm hoping that you got to see the first webinar because that will make a bit more sense of the second one. In the first webinar, I introduced you to William Shakespeare, who actually doesn't need any kind of introduction really, but the reason why I mentioned William Shakespeare was because I used a line from his play Hamlet, where Hamlet says, "Nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so," which I use that to give some sense of the idea that our thoughts can actually determine the outcome of a lot of things. So they're really important. They can make the difference between whether we choose to engage with something or whether we decide not to. And I guess that's at the basis of anxiety, the idea that we can actually avoid certain things if we talk ourselves into avoiding those things, or we can talk ourselves into taking part in those things depending on how we think about it. Your child's thoughts when it comes to anxiety are extremely important because they're going to be using their thoughts to justify their anxiety and to also justify their behaviour, which is invariably avoidance, so avoiding the things that they get anxious about. So thoughts are really important, and we've got to address them, and we've got to kind of be very clever and quite sensitive when we kind of try to engage with those thoughts. We need to be accepting of these thoughts and to recognise that actually your child will use them to justify their anxiety. They will use them also to justify their decision to not participate in those things that make them anxious. And when I say acceptance, I don't mean that we give in. I'm not saying that we should kind of just roll over and let it happen, but just to acknowledge that your child is having these thoughts and they've been having them for some time, and they are useful. They are, in your child's mind, they are preventing them from coming to any harm, any further harm. So they are making, those anxious thoughts will be making some sense to your child. And also there's an element of truth in every thought that we have, even in the anxious thoughts, even in the thoughts that maybe, in the cold light of day seem irrational, unrealistic, illogical. Even those thoughts have an element of truth in them. What I mean by that is, if your child was anxious about exams, maybe they would be telling themselves that they might fail their exam, that they may not do as well as they would like to do at the exam. Exams are about acquiring information and then on a given day, at a given time, imparting that information and hopefully coming up with the right answer to the question that you're being asked. If you don't have that information, if you can't impart that information because you don't have it, that could be a concern. And that might lend itself to anxiety. Similarly, talking about going to the dentist. Going to the dentist is going to create some discomfort, some pain. If you think that you can go to the dentist and not experience any discomfort or pain, then you've clearly never been to the dentist before. So we know that those things happen. The buy-in to going to the dentist is that if you experience some discomfort and pain now, you won't have to experience higher amounts of discomfort and pain later on. So there is a point and purpose to going, but we can't say that it's not uncomfortable. We can't say that there's no pain involved. So there's an element of truth in the thought, and we just need to kind of accept that reality. So what we're going to try and do is we're going to try to identify the thought. And how we do that is we ask questions. So we ask your child or young person questions, and through the discussion, through that inquiry, we identify what their thoughts are, what those thoughts are that are holding up the anxiety. So how do we ask those questions? We just ask those questions. We say, what goes through your mind when you get anxious? Tell me a little bit about what you're telling yourself when the anxiety comes. What could I do to support you with overcoming the anxiety? Have you ever been able to deal with the anxiety? What helped? What didn't help? So we ask questions. We're asking questions. We're not making statements. We're not telling the child why it is that they're anxious. We may think we know, but us knowing doesn't really matter. What matters is that the child has to find out for themselves what's underpinning their anxiety. So we ask questions. I don't know whether you're familiar with this gentleman. I hope you can see him, and that's Columbo. So those of us who are older to remember Columbo remember that he was a Los Angeles detective who solved murders. And he solved murders by asking lots of questions, and he was very curious. And he would say something like, "Oh, just one more thing," and then he would ask another question. Because he was asking questions, there was this idea that the people that he was asking questions of, usually the murder suspects, thought that he was stupid, thought that he was that he didn't know any answers, he just knew lots of questions. But if you remember Columbo, very close to the end of the program, he would make a statement. He would tell you what was going on. But before that, he would ask lots of questions. He was curious. I wonder. And that's what we need to be. We need to be like little Columbos when we are speaking to our children about anxiety, finding out from them what might be going on, what might be contributing to the anxiety, what might they be telling themselves. So we're investigating, not the scene of the crime, but we're investigating the source of the anxiety. We will look to challenge it, and we will look to kind of find some answers. But that's not the point and purpose at this stage. It's about just asking questions. When you ask a question, if you are given an answer, write it down. What's important is to kind of keep hold of the answers, because from one conversation where your child is anxious to another conversation, the answer may change, and it's just important to follow that line of inquiry. Don't worry too much if you can't get to the nub of the answer. We don't want to badger our children into kind of like coming up with an answer if they don't really have one. We just need a close approximation to it. We're just trying to get as close as we can to what we think is going on for our child in terms of what they're telling themselves. If you can't get close, that's okay, because what I will do at the end of the webinar sessions is I'll give you a handout which will provide you with lots of thinking errors, lots of examples of thinking errors that your child and you as an adult, all of us who experience anxiety, will make. So for example, black and white thinking, making a mountain out of a molehill, wearing negative glasses, glass half empty. And one that's really quite important, and we use it all of the time, is mind reading. So for example, when we have a situation that we're kind of worried about, scared about, and we tell ourselves that the people in that situation will be making all sorts of judgments about us, will have already made their mind up about us before we even get there, and they'll be saying things. Invariably we're saying to ourselves that these things that they're saying to us are not very pleasant. And that's even before these people have opened their mouths. So young people, children, engage this idea about mind reading, and that's a fault error. And we can't possibly know what other people think. We can have a guesstimate at it, and sometimes that's right, and sometimes it's wrong. But we can't know for certain. The other one, not knowing about something for certain, is having a crystal ball. The idea that you can actually look into the future, see the future, and know what's going to happen next. And a lot of us do that, but we do that in our everyday life. We anticipate what's going to happen next. It tends to happen more so with people that are anxious. They seem to think that they know what the outcome is going to be. So there's lots of ways of tracking thoughts, lots of ways of tracking unhelpful, irrational thoughts. And like I say, we're having that conversation. At some point we are going to challenge those thoughts, but not yet. What I think is also important is to externalise the problem. And what I mean by that is to take the blame away from your child and to recognise that there is a distinct difference between your child and the anxiety. So we externalise the problem. What do I mean by externalise the problem? I mean that we turn it into a monster, and we say that this is the monster or the bully or whatever it is you want to call the anxiety, and we think about it like an unwanted visitor. That is, you've had a knock at the door, and because you're such lovely people, you've let this unwanted visitor in, and the visitor is quite happy to stay, and it will stay as long as it wants. And you've been very pleasant and polite, and it's really difficult to get rid. So you have to kind of find a way to get rid of the monster or the bully, but that's not easy. You have to kind of like listen to it, find its weak spots, its Achilles heel, and then once you've been able to do that, you can actually ask it to leave. But it doesn't happen overnight, it takes time. So it's important that your child knows that they're not to blame, they're not responsible for the anxiety, because a lot of children and young people will have a suspicion that they are responsible for their own anxiety, and that will be making them feel even worse, possibly even guilty. So on top of the anxiety, they'll have guilt to deal with as well. We are in a battle, they are in a battle with their anxiety, and it's important that we kind of acknowledge that. And with any battle, you're going to win, you're going to lose some battles, Sometimes you're going to have a situation where you're hoping that you can, on this occasion you're going to overcome the anxiety, but you will find that you didn't. But the next time you might. My thinking about that is that we don't think about it in terms of losing. I said in the first webinar that the language you use is really important. So let's not think about this as a loss or as having losers, but let's think about telling the child that this is really important. This time when we try to overcome the problem, when we try to find a solution, we found another way that didn't work. And the thinking that helped us to understand how it didn't work, what we did that didn't work, or what we thought that didn't work. Next time we apply that in another situation, we can use that knowledge to overcome the problem. What your child is also going to be doing is they're going to be overestimating the extent of the threat of harm to themselves from the anxiety, and they're going to be underestimating their ability and your ability as their parent to help them with it. So we need to just be aware of that. So they are going to be overestimating. They're going to be telling themselves that it's the worst case scenario, the worst thing that could ever happen, and that they couldn't possibly manage it. So it's important that we kind of like remind them of those times in the past when they have managed the problem, when they have dealt with it, when they have met the challenge and they have overcome the difficulty. And that can come from anywhere. Any examples you can provide that will help them to understand that they have been able to manage something and survive it, overcome it. I also like to kind of think about this in terms of when we're dealing with the bully or the monster is our child's worst enemy. That makes sense. So the bully and the monster have a vested interest in saying things to the child within their thoughts that confirm the reasons for them to be anxious, that support the anxiety. And what we're looking for is to have a different conversation. So it's a conversation that they would have with their best friend, who presumably would not want them to kind of be anxious, to worry, to fret, to avoid certain situations, not to have the life that they deserve. So that's important, that kind of juxtaposition between your best friend and your worst enemy. Because we're going to have this fight, this ongoing battle is going on inside your child's mind, inside their head, and we need to kind of like replace unhelpful advice, unhelpful thoughts, unhelpful beliefs with those thoughts and beliefs that are more helpful. In the first webinar we spoke about the need to kind of practice breathing and to practice mindfulness techniques and to practice the grounding, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. These things are really important, and they're much more important when it comes to tackling thoughts, because the child needs to have a sense of themselves as being able to keep calm, to maintain calmness, whilst they're having this internal battle, and whilst they're trying to figure some stuff out. So we're going to practice breathing, we're going to practice the mindfulness, and we're going to practice the grounding on ourselves, on the adults as well, because there must be thoughts that you have that are very unhelpful. I don't know about you, but usually when I think about something too much, a problem, doesn't necessarily help me to find a solution. Sometimes it actually just kind of makes the problem worse. It starts to kind of fester. So we can overthink things, and part of this is about not overthinking things. It's about looking for information that will help us to change our unhelpful thoughts and replace them with more helpful thoughts. Also, the other thing is we can't get rid of thoughts, and I don't know whether you've attended any of my workshops, but one of the things that I talk about a lot is about the inability to eradicate a thought. It's a nice idea to think we can get rid of thoughts and they'll be gone forever, but unfortunately it doesn't work like that. When the thought's in, it's hard to get it out. So what I want you to do is I want you to think about a pink elephant. This is the pink elephant. So I want you to think about a pink elephant in your mind's eye, and I want you to imagine that the pink elephant is near a pool of water and that it can soak up lots of water into its trunk, and then it turns to you and it completely drenches you in water. So you're covered in water. Okay? Right, so now what I want you to do is I want you to stop thinking about the pink elephant. Forget the pink elephant. There was no pink elephant. The pink elephant never existed. It was in your imagination. And when you've stopped thinking about the pink elephant, we'll move on. Okay, it's going to be a while, if at all, before you stop thinking about the pink elephant, because once it's in, it's in. And that was something that I did 10 seconds ago, and it's going to be with you for a while. So if that's not going to leave you anytime soon, then imagine how long it would take to eradicate a thought that your child's been having for a long time. It's very difficult. It's impossible. We're not here to eradicate thoughts. We're not trying to get rid of a thought. What we're trying to do is find a more helpful thought. Using some of those techniques that I spoke about earlier, but also, and this is quite key, in therapy or in any kind of useful conversation, what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring some new information to the person that's receiving the therapy, or to the person who is engaged in the conversation, that they didn't have before. So they come to you with information that is supporting their anxious belief, their anxious thoughts and feelings. And what you are looking for, similar to what Columbo does, is you are looking for some information that's more useful, that can help to change their mind about their belief. And that's the hard bit, because that's not easy, funnily enough. You have to go looking for information. You have to, not you necessarily, but you have to kind of like know where to point the child in the right direction of looking for information. So I want to give you an example of that. So one young person that I worked with, a young woman, had a fear of contamination. She had germ phobia, and she was absolutely convinced that she was going to digest or ingest a germ or bacteria, and that was going to hurt her quite seriously. And if not hurt her, it would hurt somebody in the family. So she used to clean things till within an inch of their life and her life as well. She used to kind of clean her hands a lot. So in her mind, the belief system, what was upholding the anxiety was this idea that germs are bad, that germs can kill you, that the best thing to do is to avoid germs. And what I introduced to her was the idea, the possibility of germs being good. Not all germs, of course. Some germs do hurt you. Some bacteria is bad for you. But we spoke about things like penicillin, and I suggested to her that she look up some information about penicillin and find out what penicillin is. And what she found out, lo and behold, was that penicillin is bacteria. But penicillin is good bacteria, and penicillin actually is the bacteria that can help to for you to overcome infection and disease. And also we have good bacteria in our stomach, and that helps to break down food, but it also helps to counteract bad bacteria in the stomach if you eat something that's past its use by date, for example. Okay, so what she came with was a very kind of clear hypothesis, which was that if I were to get contaminated, if I were to pick up some germs, that would then result in me feeling poorly and going down with some sort of infection that I may not recover from. And what we found over time was that actually she could be exposed to germs, to bacteria. We are anyway. There's not an awful lot we can do about that, short of living in a very kind of clinical environment, which we don't. And if we did live in a clinical environment, for example on the moon, and then we were to be exposed to bacteria that didn't exist on the moon, because we'd had no resilience to the bacteria, because we hadn't been able to build up a tolerance to certain bacterias, which we do as part and parcel of living life and coming into contact with other people and other things. What we do is we build up a tolerance, so we need bacteria. This helped her. This helped her to understand the importance of bacteria. Okay? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to kind of replace, not eradicate, not remove entirely, replace one unhelpful thought with a more helpful thought. And usually that helpful thought comes about as a result of receiving information, knowledge, that you didn't have before. It's Columbo. Just one more thing. And usually that just one more thing is that bit of information that's going to solve the problem. That isn't easy. It's easier to say and talk about it than it is to actually do it. You have to kind of go and look for stuff, research the problem, find the solution. Okay, I hope that's been helpful. Like I said, I will kind of provide you with some thinking errors, a sheet with some thinking errors on it, so that you can use that when you're looking to identify these unhelpful thoughts. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and I will see you for the last of the 3 webinars. And in the last webinar, we're going to be talking about goals, and we're going to be talking about putting new thoughts into practice so that we can eventually, finally, reduce the levels of anxiety that you've been seeing, witnessing in your children and young people. So until we meet again, take care and stay safe.